Recording in progress.
You got time. We got a couple minutes.
Oh, my seat is high. Mine?
Okay, good morning, everybody. We're going to start, so if we could all take our seats. Okay, I'm going to call the continuing from June 17th budget hearing to order. Today is June 25th, 2024. I'm going to call the meeting to order. It is 9:02. It's just a continuation, so we're not reopening. Can I get the Pledge of Allegiance? Supervisor Kosmicki, could you lead us?
Ready? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks so much. Okay, so now can I get an acknowledgement of certificate of posting?
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that's a 5-0. Okay, budget hearing, which we are continuing today. I'm going to turn it over to Deputy CAO Henny Ring for the commencement budget hearings and some comments and updates.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, board members, department heads, members of the public, county employee, staff. Thank you. Today was the continuation of the budget hearings from June 17th. First, I want to thank administrative staff in working hard on presenting a balanced budget today. As Ramon will go through the presentation, you will see the details in that. Also, in addition, we noticed inadvertently that there were several budget units that were unfortunately not added into the budget package materials last week. So I do want to make sure I call those out and for the record, so they are added in there.
And I believe there was a handout from
Yes.
clerk of the board for,
Yes,
and
I
there's
believe there was
copies in
also
the back for the public, just so everybody has what we're talking about.
Yeah.
It looks like this.
So they have that available to them. So for the record, it looks like budget unit 2390 was omitted for public health administration. Also, in addition, it was 2392, which is CASPHI, which is California Strengthening Public Health Initiative. Budget unit 2394, Future of Public Health, 2397, which is Public Health Institute and California Overdose Prevention. I'm sorry, it was 2397, PHI and COPN. And then also it was 2406, which is CHVP California Home Visiting Program. And the last one, it looks like it's 2420 Immunization Assistance Program. So those are added into this budget process. Again, in reviewing this past week, we've added those several units. Also, we took in consideration some of the comments from the board as well, and we incorporated that in today's presentation. And with that, I will introduce Ramon Avon, Budget Officer, to review today's presentation with the board.
Okay, great. So we're going to move on to item E, which is Ramon is going to review the recommendations from last meeting. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to go off script just for a few minutes, and I'm going to switch what's being displayed on the screen because I want to start off with the general fund overview. It was an attachment to the agenda. Could I zoom in a little more?
That would be great. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to start off with this attachment because this is the information. It's a summary of the general fund of all proposals, and this will show the adjustments that were made based on the board request to add an additional position to the general fund, which was the assistant CAO position. And so before I get into all the numbers, I just want everybody to know that at this point, we do have a balanced budget, not just for the general fund, but for all funds in the county. And I'm gonna scroll down. So again, this is a summary of all proposals in the general fund. And I want to focus on how we balance the general fund budget, which is very similar to how, as I go through this one summary slide, I want everybody to know that it's very similar for all funds. Not that every fund is in the same boat, but the idea behind balancing the general fund budget is very similar for all funds. What I mean is, when you have this this subtotal here, the 119 million, the 68 million, and then the numbers in parentheses, what that means is that the number in parentheses is showing a shortfall for all proposals as a whole. And the way we balance that shortfall is with fund balance, right? Reserves. And in this case, the general fund, we're saying we have a balanced budget because the administrative office is using estimates for fund balance based on audited financial statements ending June 30th of 2023. So as of June 30th of 2023, the fund balance was what you see on the screen, right? There's different categories of fund balance. We have non-spendable, we have restricted, assigned, unassigned. There's one item on this list that is not listed as a specific category, and I did that on purpose. It's the SJO benefit fee. And the reason I included that $6 million at the bottom is because it was received in the current fiscal year. And so a lot of these numbers are from, like I said, June 30th of 2023. Now, I have two columns for the estimated fund balance. The column on the right, which is what I specifically chose to use to address that shortfall of 50 million. And that number on the bottom, that $225,000 that you see at the bottom, what that tells us is that the current spending plan will leave about $250,000 in unassigned fund balance. Now, on the left-hand side, we have more numbers. That 3.9 million, 3.3 million, 1.4 million, all those numbers on the left-hand column with the 17.7 million as a total, that is also part of fund balance. And what I'm saying this fiscal year, which is something that we're doing different from a year ago, is that we're not touching $17.7 million worth of restricted fund balance in fiscal year 24-25 based on estimated information, based on information we've reviewed. We're saying we're only going to use the right-hand side of fund balance to balance the budget. A year ago, we used all available fund balance, and then this year, I'm breaking it out into two segments to show we're not going to use all of it. However, we're going to use some of it, most of it. And again, this is, as far as the recommended budget is concerned, we are balanced, and the administrative office is recommending the board to approve the budget as is. It's a spending plan. It will allow departments countywide to have spending authority starting July 1st. And historically, I did have a conversation with the Auditor Controller's Office last week, and he shared with me that historically, the county, even though the county may have budgeted in a way that showed all fund balance, would be used, or that we have a deficit or a shortfall in the spending plan, the actual transactions, once the fiscal year is completed and the Auditor Controller's Office closes the books, they've noticed that historically, just in the last 5 years, we end the fiscal year adding to fund balance versus dipping into fund balance and using fund balance. So the spending plan appears as though we would be using a large portion of fund balance. The reality has been that we end up adding to fund balance in any given fiscal year. And that could be due to different factors. On the side of salaries and benefits, it could be that historically we've had vacancy budgeting. This year, we're not saying we anticipate salary savings, right? This year, we're saying we have enough fund balance to move forward with vacancy budgeting, and there's still a little bit left at the end, knowing full well that we will have vacancy budget. I mean, we will have some salary savings due to vacancies. That's just part of doing business for the county. And we also did address vacancy budgeting in this 24-25 recommended budget because, as you recall, from May, that's when we started talking about, well, these are the options. We had a $6 million shortfall. We can address that issue by unfunding vacant positions. Over the course of a month and a half, administration and departments countywide, we've been working on making adjustments and fine-tuning it so that the presentation and the information you see today is not showing a shortfall of anything, right? We have a balanced budget. We have $250,000 there in unassigned fund balance. And again, historically, the county doesn't end the fiscal year with $250,000 in unassigned fund balance. Right now, we have $30 million in unassigned fund balance, and that's that third to last item you see on the screen, $30.3 million. With that, I will go into the regular presentation. And if anyone has questions about this item, we can address it after the presentation, or if you want to have,
I'm okay with after.
After?
Let's do the whole presentation so we can
Perfect.
get all the questions
thank you.
included.
And I may go through these a little quicker than last time just because a lot of it is unchanged. So thank you everyone for being here today, members of the public and staff. This is our second session of budget hearings. So what is being approved today? Today's recommended budget is spending authority. Again, the administrative office is looking for a temporary due pass on the recommended budget. This spending plan will allow staff to continue. We have a lot in fixed assets. We'll go through the fixed assets schedule at the end. We have capital projects. Everything is the same. And we're here today at this second session because the board requested adding an assistant county administrative officer. And we also want to share an overview. It's a brief overview of general fund training, travel, meals, lodging, and transportation. And there was also a request for fund balances related to trusts, restricted funding, and others. This third item was addressed by the auditor's controller's office. They did provide an attachment. It's the fund balance. I believe it's titled Note 17, fund balances. So that'll have all the information in summary form related to trusts, restricted funding, and others for the entire county. Now, I did hear from the chief of probation related to some of this training, travel, meals. And I believe the sentiment from an email I received from her probably echoes throughout the county for all departments, which is a lot of the training that is being budgeted by departments, some of it is state mandated training. And so they really expressed their concerns in reducing training budget just because these are minimum requirements a lot of times. And departments have been struggling with retention. And as people throughout the county leave for whatever reasons, we get new staff on board, and this, the new folks we're getting, they need the training. And so I just wanted to share that with the board so that you keep that in mind. Oh, one more thing. Some of these trainings are paid with state money or other grants, just so you are aware. So this slide is an overview of general fund only. And you can see that the actuals, it's just a sum. We looked at training, travel, meals, lodging, transportation, because these were the items that were discussed at the previous budget hearing. So for fiscal year 22, the total of those items is $320,000. For fiscal year 23, the total was $462,000. There was a bit of an increase. And then the CAO recommended for 23-24 was $727,000. The department requested was $822,000. The CAO recommended for 24-25 is currently $825,000. The Auditor Controller's Office, they did an analysis of general fund department expenditures based on actual expenditures, and they came up with a low of 60% for any given fiscal year, or a high of 80% of any given fiscal year. And what that means is typically the general fund, all departments as a whole, even if they have a budget of 600,000 or 700,000, or at this point, 800,000, the trend shows that 60% of that budget will be used. So that means 40% will remain in fund balance, 40% will remain unused. And I mean, if that were the case, and if we look at the 24-25 recommended budget of 825,000, that means that on the low end, we can expect general fund departments countywide to spend about $495,000 based on trends, based on the history that the Auditor Controller's Office reviewed. And on the high end of the spectrum, based on that $825,000 figure, if countywide general fund departments, I will slow down maybe. On the high end of expenditures, based on that 825, 80% of that would be 660,000. And again, if you look at actuals, next fiscal year, if 60% of that budget is used, it would be $495,000, which is pretty close to that 22-23 actuals. And again, I remind the board that we do have a balanced budget right now, so there really is no need to reduce these items at this point in time. This slide is exactly the same as the last week's slide, except for salary and benefits. There was a minor increase due to the addition of the assistant CAO position. Also, the Behavioral Health Department requested 8 positions. This is a correction from the last week's meeting. We had 7. It should have been 8. And now we get into countywide overview for positions. So the first time I came up and shared the list of general fund positions, we had 19 being requested for a total cost of $2.2 million. The administrative office is recommending only 1 position be added to the general fund based on board request, and that's the assistant CAO position for a total cost of $327,000. On the non-general fund side of operations, we had initially 17 positions being requested, and HSA, that was an oversight. They were not requesting new positions. They actually were shifting people around. So on the right-hand side, we see the administrative office positions recommended for non-general fund departments. So on the subvented funds, we have behavioral health with 8 positions being requested, and the administrative office is moving forward with that recommendation to approve those positions. It's 8 positions. The one that was missing was the Human Resources Analyst 2. It was always included as part of the schedule of authorized positions. We just, we failed to add that one item to the presentation. So that's 8 positions for an estimated increased cost of $1.4 million. And on the enterprise fund positions, we have a code enforcement officer being added to the county integrated waste management team. This position will help address the code enforcement issues related to, let's see if I remember. Gosh, homeless abatement, and I think other things that the board has mentioned as far as the needs for code enforcement in the county. So again, the administrative office is recommending that the board approve those positions on the right-hand side of the column. This slide is also the same as last week. The only change was to salaries and benefits. The small increase was related to the assistant CAO position being added. The expenditures by category for all funds did not change. It's the same, except for salaries and benefits. Small change there again because of the addition of the one FTE based on board request. The general fund overview recommended budget, there's no change there. Again, small change to salaries and benefits due to the assistant CAO position being added. For this slide, the pie chart was updated based on public feedback. The previous slide was actually showing all fund expenditures by department, which skewed the allocations that we have in front of us. And so I went back into the budgeting platform tool. I found the pie chart that showed us the information for general fund expenditures only, and it changed the allocation for all departments. I believe the department that was mentioned at the last meeting was the sheriff's office. So for the general fund expenditures by department only, the sheriff's budget is an 18% allocation. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. I will pass it on to Madam Chair.
Okay, and since this is a continuation of our conversation and deliberation, there is no public comment. I just wanted to make sure that everyone's aware, because we had the public comment at the beginning of budget hearings. So we're bringing it back to the board for conversation. Who would like to go?
Madam Chair, if I may.
Supervisor Kozmicki?
Thank you. Well, I had a couple questions. Let me pull this back up, sorry. My computer just played games on me. Before I get into something, the vacancy budgeting, well, a couple things, a couple statements. Vacancy budgeting, I think in the next year, we really do have to focus on moving away from that. It's just essentially just as a mechanism to have, flexibility within departments that we just frankly can't afford going forward. So I know that's not necessarily relevant to this particular budget today, but just going forward, for me at least, I'd like to really have a plan to move away from vacancy budgeting. The general fund reserve unassigned, there's a lot of numbers being thrown around and it can be a little confusing, especially for the public, but I just want to maybe, if you could just clarify, when you talked about $6 million shortfall, that was including all the requests, I believe, that were being made. But also there's this reserve aspect to it. And I just want to clarify, because my understanding is that a lot of the reserves, so we have a fairly healthy restricted reserve, but then we also have a significant amount of commitments that are involve roads and other things that are technically, I don't want to spend those dollars, but if we had, an alien attack or something, just being facetious, we'd have some money available to address whatever issues, obviously the earthquake example and things like that. So I don't know if you can comment on that, just so that the level of potential alarm for somebody that may see the budget. And because we've talked in the past about general fund reserve, unassigned reserve, and getting to a 15% is a healthy number, a relatively healthy number of your general fund budget. Can you elaborate a little bit on where we're at with this? We talked about building up from 5% to 10% to 15%, while we sort of temporarily set aside money for road projects that we've committed to.
The reserve policy is part of the presentation. Unfortunately, it's one of the last slides. It's toward the end of it, but I can talk briefly about it. So the current reserve policy that was implemented a couple of years ago it was initially a 3-year plan So that we had a 3-year plan. The first year was supposed to set aside 5% for operational reserves, 2.5% for emergency reserves, and then year 2 was supposed to be 10% for operational reserves, 5% for emergency reserves, and right now, year 1 and year 2 have been implemented, and we have 10 million for operational reserves, 5 million for emergency reserves,
Right.
and then $500,000 for disaster recovery. Now, due to timing, Vanessa, is there a way to get this slide up?
And I want to just bring this up because you talked about reserves in the initial piece here. And $256,000, if you're just looking at unassigned reserve and you don't understand like the way this is laid out in the terminology, can be relatively alarming. That's not all the money that we have available if something happens, basically, is what I'm getting at.
Sorry about that. So I wanted to show the general fund overview again because it ties to the conversation about reserves. So the 30.3 million in unassigned fund balance, that figure there is what we are using to address the reserve policy and to implement that plan of having eventually 15% for operating reserves and then 5% for emergency reserves. Right now, at this point in time, we've implemented year 2 of the policy using that $30.3 million. And so even though I didn't get a chance to break out that $30.3 million into 10 million for operational, 5 million for emergencies, $500,000 for disaster recovery, I want you to know that that $30.3 million has that reserve policy implemented in it.
And I just wanted to bring clarity to that, just so that it's clear that, again, that we are being fiscally prudent here, that that's something that we've been proactive about, and I think we need to continue to do so going forward. So I just wanted for clarity on that. More so just for the public, so that it isn't out there that, oh, they have the $256,000 and something happens and we're in big trouble. It's not the case. So beyond that, I'll try to be as brief as I can. On this other piece, the travel budget, I appreciate the $825,000 figure that you showed. Based on trends, you said we spend 60% of that. I don't, I have something that I want to bring up that maybe can be incorporated into, but just going forward, I don't see a reason why we wouldn't budget at least a little closer to the actual amount. 60%, if we're only spending 60% of it, and a portion of that 60% certainly is discretionary. I know you said there's certain things that are mandated, but I know Ramon has been amazing. The staff has been amazing throughout this process, especially the last couple of weeks when we've thrown curveballs. But just going forward for next year, I would like to see a report that breaks out what is mandated and what is not mandated, so that there is some level of, and I'm not saying we should just slash our travel budget. I personally think we can certainly afford to cut it back. And we could do the same amount of travel that we're in training that we're doing now and cut it back significantly by even per se 20%. And it seems like that would certainly still be in the ballpark of what's, overestimated. So just for the future, that's something, but I do appreciate the round number. And then, so I assume this might be the appropriate time to bring something up that a relative curveball that just had time to reflect on. And please stop me if it's not, because I know we're going to get into consent agenda and then regular agenda, and we have these items within those. But and Ramon knows what I'm bringing up because I asked for some numbers on this. So last week, Monday, we met. We have this issue with the sheriff's office, the jail in particular. There's a lot of concern about the jail.
As that is on regular agenda, the sheriff, is that the more appropriate spot to be having that on regular agenda? We do actually have an item. I just want to make sure that we're staying
I just want to make sure I can get it out.
Yeah, I think that the timing on that would be the sheriff's item.
But I also think that if you're approving I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I didn't mean to. If you're approving a consent agenda, there's context, because there's order to all these things. So frankly, I would need to look back at consent, but if there's something in consent that there may be a will, and I know there hasn't been a will, for instance, in, I guess travel's in the regular agenda as well. The vacant positions, I just want to make sure that we don't have to go back.
I hear where you're going.
Because frankly, I have a couple of positions that are involved with this idea that would require on funding at least for the next year. And so I just want to make sure that we're able to, that those the vacant positions are on the regular agenda and
not on the consent agenda. My
what I'm
question to you
saying,
is,
yeah.
are they on the consent agenda?
because I wasn't to that level here.
Because I'm looking and I don't see anything about the sheriff on consent.
But I would like to, and I think there might be initial alarm, but I think there's going to be support for what we're going to throw out. And there are a couple positions that I want to look at in order to be able to help the jail here in the next year. And that's why I want to make sure that we're not necessarily approving those positions and then having to go back.
Deputy CEO.
Madam Chair, potentially we could move to regular agenda right now and go.
And then, so we
I'd
could take it out of
appreciate that.
order.
Yeah, that would help. Yeah, just for
That's okay.
clarity's sake.
So let's hold off on that. Well, thank you for the suggestion. And, okay, any other, are you complete?
Yeah, that's it
Okay.
for now, yeah.
Any other? Supervisor Gonzalez?
I had some similar concerns. While I appreciate the efforts to balance the budget, we're doing nothing in terms of helping out the staffing at the sheriff's office and the jail. And so I would love to hear what Supervisor Kazmicki is going to
appreciate that.
suggest, because that's something that we're obligated or we need to do for the community, just for health and safety in general. So I'll wait until that comes
Okay,
up.
great. Nothing, Supervisor, nothing? Okay, and I have nothing on this area also. So let's move on. Right now, we're going to move from item E. We're going to go to regular agenda, and let's just go through the regular agenda in the order that we have, unless you...
Can I recommend that we move the sheriff's office up because of the implications that may be involved?
Sure, I don't have a problem with
I
that. We
appreciate
can move the
that.
sheriff up. So what we're going to do is we're going to take it sheriff first, and then we'll go back to the order of regular agenda. So everybody's on track with us. So we're going to start with item number 7 through 12, which is the sheriff's budget, unit number 40. So any additions or comments, Ramon, before I bring it back for deliberation of anything to comment on that from you? I just want to make sure.
No,
Okay.
not right now.
So
Thank you.
we'll bring it back, and since you requested this, Supervisor
Appreciate it,
Kosmicki.
Yeah, thank you so much, Madam Chair. And so there's obviously been a lot of concern about the sheriff's office, the jail. And, last Monday, we had a proposal that, was an effort, and I appreciate the effort, creative thinking from administration, but the sheriff also made it clear that it wasn't necessarily going to help the situation there at the jail. Some of us have been, pretty concerned about wanting to fill the vacancies and help fill the vacancies at the jail and operations of the sheriff's office. And so, we had this meeting last Monday, and I'm one that sometimes ideas come right to me, and sometimes I need some time to reflect a little bit. And in this case, I needed at least a little time to reflect and had a conversation. We can only have 2 of us. So Supervisor Gonzalez, I would have certainly involved you, knowing your support for the sheriff's office. But Supervisor Zanger and I had both had concerns about really trying to, at least in this short term, to address the concerns at the jail, and essentially believe that we still, and I'll certainly, offer the floor to Supervisor Zanger whenever, but we still need, we got to do something about this. And first want to just, because it was so late in the game, what happened was we reached out to the sheriff, Kelly Kennedy, were gracious to meet with us, and we, had an open conversation about, okay, we have limits here, obviously, because it's a tight budget, but what can we do and do some creative thinking to do more to address the jail staffing concern. And the sheriff and Ms. Kennedy provided some solutions. And on the other side, of course, it's our job, as the sheriff pointed out last week, it's our job to make the challenging, to look at the costs and make it's a challenge what we're up here doing, and to make decisions and have ideas that are maybe difficult. And so we wanted to step forward and provide some ideas. And so at some point, I want to hand it off to the sheriff. I know he's on Zoom, wasn't feeling great, but I appreciate he's on Zoom, ready to go. But just want to say we heard him loud and clear. He needs help hiring jail staff, retaining jail staff. We sat down, and the recommendation from the jail, from the sheriff and Ms. Kennedy was to essentially reclassify, and this isn't a novel new idea, this is something that's been thrown around, but to essentially reclassify the jail positions. And the sheriff, I would invite the sheriff when he gets on to elaborate more on his idea here, and to reclassify the jail positions that would immediately help with recruitment and retaining of jail staff. We have some vacancies. I know we're in the process of going through some potential hiring as well, which is a positive. And so they came up with a number of what that would cost to reclassify those positions, which was roughly, and thank you, Ramon, at the last minute here. We were talking up till yesterday, help with the sheriff's office in collaboration, that would roughly cost about $411,000+, so we'll say $412,000 this budget year. And Ramon was very helpful in also pointing out that there was a reduction in the capital improvements. And Ramon, I would invite to obviously to elaborate as well where he can. I know he's going through the presentation here, but because he's the accounting guy, I don't pretend to be an accountant, but there was this adjustment in capital improvements that freed up an additional $256,000, which would leave the 412 minus the 256. And talking to, took some time, talked to department heads that were all the ones that have positions on the list that are funded, that were all very helpful outside of law enforcement, that were all very, upfront about their departments and their needs in the next year. And I certainly don't want to speak for those department heads that basically said that they could get by without these positions for the next year. One was the egg biologist inspector for 130, the total cost of 131,700, and one of the building and grounds maintenance crew members at a cost of roughly 74, I believe. And if you unfunded those positions, that would free up, if you take into account the capital projects, and this is not just us coming up with wild ideas, we're going off of discussions with budget officer, what we need to get this accomplished, and department heads having extensive conversations with department heads, knowing that administration was already had way too much on their plate, to throw something at them to try to get them to do this in one day. We spent basically entire days in the last couple of days on the phone, just getting that feedback from department heads. And it seems like if you unfunded those positions, you'd have the funding to address the reclassification of the jail positions, and you would actually have a slight overage there of about $50,000 if the numbers all obviously add up. We have some flexibility, obviously, when you get into contingency funds and things like that, but essentially you would have enough money to pay for the sheriff's strong recommendation of reclassifying. You don't have to add positions, so we don't have to go out and add more corrections officers. It was thrown around, we can talk, later, obviously, about if there's, a need for jail techs and things like that, but we're not adding positions, we are reclassifying the positions, essentially having enhancements of pay in the jail so that we can really make sure that we're successful in retaining and recruiting and filling those vacant positions so that the jail is more appropriately staffed. So that was essentially step one. We talked about some other things like hiring incentives, but I just wanted to throw that out there to get a discussion going because, and I would invite the sheriff if he's available, if he could elaborate on, because this didn't come from us, this came from the sheriff. We asked him for solutions. It was on our end, we said, we'll try to find a way to get the money for it. So if the sheriff could possibly come on, I'd appreciate him when he can to further elaborate on what this would do and how it would help the jail.
Before we bring the sheriff on, I'd like to hear from other board members. So are you complete?
Yeah.
Okay, Supervisor Gonzalez?
Yeah, my concern was last week, there was an ask for staffing, and this budget, though it's approved, it's balanced, it fails to address the staffing at the jail. So I appreciate the concern that both Supervisor Kazmicki and Zanger had with Sheriff Taylor, but I want to hear what the impact is on the other departments that we're looking to take away from to give the sheriff. And so if you have those details, either Ramon or Eric, I would like to hear them, because we've got to balance it, but we also have to keep mind of public safety. And so that's just where I'm at.
And if
before
I may
vote
just
on it.
add on to that real brief.
Hold on, let's make sure she's complete.
Yeah.
I'm done, yes.
Okay,
There were some other positions that I could have thrown out there, but those were the two that seemed like,
okay.
yeah, there were a couple others that in talking to department heads, but go forward. And
Okay.
If these don't work, then we can talk about others.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Sotelo?
Yeah, I'm curious to hear from the sheriff, but I appreciate you being proactive and bringing this item back and really looking for a solution. I think it's much needed. And so I'm happy that we're having this discussion right now, and I really look forward to hearing from the sheriff.
Yeah,
Supervisor
thank you.
Zanger?
Yeah, Supervisor Kosmicki pretty much summed everything up, I think. So we'll hear from the sheriff, but this seemed like a really good solution, just as far as everything that we've been going through so far, the reclassification of the way that the CO positions are structured. I mean, this really would, and he'll tell you, this would solve a lot of the issues, I believe, as far as being able to fill those vacant positions. And as far as the unfunding the couple of the positions, we can also, I'm open to any suggestions. We can get creative. I mean, if we're only using 60% of this travel budget on trend, then I mean, we could take some from that and potentially we would be able to offset it. And we wouldn't have to do something like that, maybe only unfunding one of them. So there's different ideas and different ways we could go about it. And I think that's one thing that just, obviously popped in my head today when we're going through it. But I think we'll just hear from the sheriff now. He'll explain it all.
Okay, before we go to the sheriff, thank everyone for looking at the sheriff's needs, because it is a crucial area that we must stay focused on. But I also want to remind everybody, especially the public, that we are a Prop 13 poor county. Our revenue generation is a challenge that is almost impossible to address without really looking at where our revenue sources are coming from. And in order to do long-term corrective actions for funding positions long-term, because this is when you're reclassing positions or adding positions, it is a long cost for many years, going all the way into retirement and into pensions. So the biggest concern I have is that we have had reclasses in the past, and I have not been a supporter of the findings of the reclasses in seeing how it does not address the loss of positions from departments that people are leaving because they can't afford to live in our community. And so I am very supportive of moving with this and having this looked at, but we also need to be looking at it holistically, because we have departments that are losing just as many people. They may not be law enforcement, but they're constantly having to retrain people over and over. That's why training budgets are so important, because we don't have long-term sustainability of employees in this county because we don't pay well. I'm just saying it, we don't pay well. So I appreciate the focus on the sheriff's office, and I absolutely support where this is going, but I think we need to look at this again mid-year and start looking at how are we going to address the long-term revenue problems in our county so that we can fix the salary issues in all departments and make sure that they're funded long-term. I'm seeing Henny shaking her head, so I'm gonna just pass it to her for a sec, because honestly, if we don't look at where we're going to have revenue coming into our community, we will have to start going back to cuts. And so fixing it this year is great, but I'm looking at 5, 10, 15 years in the future, and how are we going to make sure that departments are successful if we don't have a revenue source coming into our community? So.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few things I want to note before the sheriff speaks. And this comes from HR part of it. Reclassification is a meet and confer process, so we still have to go through that process with the union on this. I just want to make sure that's clear. I believe also that the figures, and Supervisor Kosmicki said they're estimates, that HR would have to do a harder look at those numbers, because I believe some of the numbers that were given, employees, any given pay period, somebody could move in a step up, which could increase it a bit. So we would have to look at a snapshot in time of where everybody stands in time and step in their position.
And my understanding, because of reclassifications historically, when you are looking at one part, that's not in a reclass how you do that. You have to look at the whole department and then at times the agency, because you get unaligned, and that becomes issues with the meet and confer process. So I just want to make sure that we understand that there's a lot of steps that are going to need to happen for this. And I'm very, very supportive of it, because the first thing that I started thinking as we were going through the budget, and thank you so much, Ramon, and all staff for getting us to this point, but it's how do we make sure that we start filling these positions and these requests, not just of law enforcement, but also of the other departments. So did you want to add anything else?
I do have one other thing, but I will after the sheriff speaks.
Okay, let's let the sheriff.
It would be contextual. There would be another, if there's concern about flexibility.
Okay, go ahead.
You know, I think it's clear we could pull $50,000 very, very conservatively, if not more, from the travel budget. But there's also an option that I discussed with Ramon about this. There's a newly established grant matching fund of $400,000 as well that we've previously did not have. And we've essentially we want to prioritize grants and matching grants, but in the past, departments have sort of figured it out within their budgets when we get to matching grants, and there could be a little bit of flexibility there if there's concern about. But the $411,000, it was down to a T number, so I would suggest maybe, again, you have $50,000 in overage right there as far as flexibility, but if there's more flexibility necessary, we could certainly pull another $50,000 to be extra safe from either the travel budget or the matching grant fund budget as well.
And I think where I'm going is that when this process starts, reclassifications process starts, one, meet and confer, and then a snapshot in time of where everybody's at. There is a little bit of a process, making sure the language.
And we talked about this.
There's things like if we'll change language and job specs, so those all take a little bit of time.
Legally required, we're understanding.
Just want to make sure that just expectation-wise that it's not a next board meeting that we'd have this done.
Yeah, you talked about that, yes. And you did with me, but obviously for the rest of the.
Yes, I just want to make sure that's clear.
And that's really where my point was going, is that this is a process and it has dominoes ramifications, and we just need to be mindful of that and be aware that we have to look at the actions that we're taking and how it can cause other unforeseen consequences. So with that, let's bring the sheriff on. Sheriff Taylor, are you with us in Zoom land?
Yes, I'm here.
And I hope you're feeling better.
Yes, and I'm sorry I'm not there in person. My eye is swollen shut, and I look bad enough as it is. You don't want me there today. So first, you can all hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
Okay, awesome. So I appreciate the discussion. I honestly, I told Supervisor Kosmicki that this is exactly how I think government is supposed to work. So I'll just kind of get into the nuts and bolts of where I'm coming from, or my team's coming from, what we talked about. Early on in the negotiations process, I was asked by staff about what did I need to focus on this year, positions or salary, if I had to choose one or the other. And although I need both, I said salary was more important this year because I'm struggling holding on to people, especially in the jail. They're paid so low compared to our surrounding communities. And to go back a little bit further, for context, The county did a great salary study where I think generously the county actually included some of our surrounding communities and surrounding cities even in the salary study. And the goal was to get everybody within 90% of that median salary in each classification. And although it's a little bit difficult to work with the classification of correctional officer, we did have enough counties to compare it to. The issue that I took with that salary study is that they used the entire range of correctional officers, so CO1, CO2, and CO3. When we were going through negotiations this last time, it was pointed out to me by the county's negotiator that the correctional officer 3 is not a flexibly staffed position, and therefore we only had one person that had ever attained that in the history of our office. So I felt that that high end of the correctional officer pay scale was not a fair comparison to use because nobody in the corrections bureau ever attains that position. So what I had thought of doing early on in negotiations, which didn't happen, is drop the correctional officer 1 designation, which is a trainee designation. When a correctional officer comes on to our staff, within the first year, they must complete what's called the core academy. Once they complete the core academy, it could be in the first month, it could be in month 11, they move up to correctional officer 2 pay scale. So the true correctional officer pay scale is correctional officer 2. And nobody ever attains the correctional officer 3. So my idea during negotiations was to drop that first pay scale, make correctional officer 2 the trainee pay scale, and bump all staff up to the correctional officer 3, because then it was a true reflection of the 90% median for surrounding communities that we compared with. So when we were, and let me go back a little bit more too, I want to publicly thank Supervisor Kozmicki and Supervisor Zanger. They reached out to our office asking for a meeting. We accepted that meeting. I thought it was a very productive meeting. And what I told both of them and what I told the board is, we know we're not going to be able to fix everything all at once, but just the fact that anybody's even trying is a really big deal for me and for my staff. And so right now where we are in the sheriff's office is where we are struggling the most is in our correctional bureau. And of the 29 allocated positions, we have 14 filled right now. We are at almost 50% vacancy rate, or not vacancy rate, but 50% operating rate. So one of the things that we need to do immediately is to try to hold on to these people that we have and try to get more people in the door. And I'm sorry, unfortunately, what the young people are looking for when they look at a job flyer is the starting salary. And we just are not competitive. So by doing this shift of correctional officers up to a higher range, the correctional officer starting and ending range is going to look more in line with that 90% of our surrounding comparison. And I think that that's really going to help not only retain staff, but get more people in the door. So the first step that we need to do as an office is to get people in here and fill the positions that are open. And then, yes, we are going to have to look forward as a county and look into adding positions. We had the state come and walk through our jail. They recommend a minimum of 40 correctional officers. We have 29. A comparable county, Lake County, which is our population and about 1,350 square miles instead of 1,393. They have 66 in corrections, 44 of which are correctional officers, to our 29. So we do need to expand our ranks, but there's no reason to try to do that right now, and because people are leaving. A real quick story. We recruited and brought a talented young man into our office. He came to us, he got his first paycheck and quit on the spot because he made more money at T-Mobile or Metro PCS, wherever he was working. So he, after 2 weeks and after a lot of money invested in the background, uniforms, and everything else, we had him for 2 weeks and he quit and went back to his old job. So that's what we're up against in the sheriff's office. This doesn't solve all the problems, but it sure as heck is a step in the right direction. And I'm open to any other questions that the board might have.
Thank you, Sheriff Taylor. We really appreciate all your feedback on this. Okay, Deputy CAO.
Just one other thing that I want to just bring up is reclassification may be one step in assisting the sheriff's office in the jail, but I would highly encourage that HR and the sheriff's office look down the road at a lower classification within the jail that would support the corrections, and that would be a technician / clerical type of, that could take some of the lower end work that is done and performed in the jail, would be more appropriately done by a classification such as like a technician or something. We could work on what that was, but what I would highly encourage is maybe after financials are done through the auditor's office mid-year, is looking at how we could support that correction piece a little bit deeper. That would be a more appropriate classification that helps support with the sheriff's office. So that's just one piece I want to add.
Thank you. Thank you. Supervisor Gonzalez?
Yes, while that was suggested at our last meeting, I know the sheriff said that he would prefer to not go that route. So can we get Sheriff Taylor's input on what Henny Ring just suggested?
Yeah, so for context in that is that when we had met with HR and CAO's office prior to try to figure out what we can do to free up, to put boots on the floor of the jail and actually do correctional officer duties, we already knew this, and we brought it to HR's attention that a lot of our correctional officers are doing jobs outside of their job classification. So they're doing clerical work. They're working the control room, which I guess isn't really outside of their realm of responsibility, but it's really not a good use of a correctional officer because we can't have that lower classification use it. So what we were looking to do initially when our ask of the county was to add those 12 lower level classifications to be able to come in and work the control room and do some more of the clerical duties to free up the correctional officers that we have to put them back on the floor. That was a strategy to tackle two things. One, make sure that people aren't working out of class. Two, be able to recruit and hire people at a lower level than a correctional officer, that we'd be able to bring them in to do very specific tasks that don't involve inmate contact. We thought we might have a better pool to choose from there, and that would free up the correctional officers. But so that was adding 12 positions to our office to free up correctional officers that we already had, and we're recruiting to try to get back to that 29. But what was put forward in the budget was to actually cut 3 correctional officer positions and replace those 3 with 3 lower classifications. So in essence, it was a net cut to our budget, and it really didn't help us because we're still going backward. We're still short those 3 positions. So that's what I objected to, was that solution for this budget year, to cut 3 correctional officers to add 3 lower classifications. But I agree with Deputy CAO Ring that we need to look at that together with HR as we move forward. And as we add those lower classification, lower paid positions that are very focused on one thing, which is control room or clerical, then we can free those correctional officers up to go back to doing correctional officer duties, if that makes sense. Sorry if that was long-winded.
No, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that you were supportive of that decision, so I thank you for that suggestion.
And we can get really creative when we do that classification, because that lower classification can be a feeder into the corrections later on. So that's one of the things that I really would like Sheriff's Office, HR to engage in, and for future. That would be a future thing.
Okay.
For sure.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that clarification. I really appreciate your feedback, Sheriff Taylor. I do really like the idea, and I'd like to make this kind of collaboration and forward thinking our kind of new motto of how we look at departments and start looking at their long-term goals. So with that, any other comments? Okay. Can we get a temporary due pass motion?
Can I make a recommendation to approve the sheriff's budget with the adjusted dollar amounts that include the $412,000 addition that we would pull from elsewhere that we can get to? And please guide me through this, Ramon, with each of these different segments of the budget, because there's multiple segments. But to increase the sheriff's budget by the $412,000 that would be funded through the unfunding of the two prior previously mentioned positions. And I guess we can get to that later, but if we need some extra comfort room, I would suggest pulling the $50,000 from the grant match fund or the travel budget. It's kind of X and Y there. It's not, I don't know how necessarily, I don't know if there's a will on where to go on that, but
I'm going to say leave it up to staff.
But we have the extra $50,000. I guess I should ask a question first. Are we comfortable with that additional $50,000 is going to cover whatever concern you may have about what you had mentioned previously?
I think it will.
Okay.
Again, it's just, when we do estimates, they're a snapshot in time, and people, they move up their step. They could have an anniversary date, and we just didn't catch it because it's the next pay period. But I don't think it would be more than that. So I think we should be fine with that.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I will come back to real quick before I finish this long motion. We did discuss, and I don't know if the sheriff wants to mention, we talked about priority levels, and reclassification was the top priority.
Let's get the full motion before we bring him back, and then we can do a second and have him talk. I just want to make sure that we get the full motion.
Because we did talk about hiring incentives, and I know that could be a negotiation issue as well. So I don't know if there's a will to discuss that now, or if we want to potentially look at that later, because we did discuss the possibility on top of this.
Okay, if we're going to continue, let's withdraw your motion and go back to conversation before we actually go to a motion.
Fine, I'll withdraw the motion and just survey the board if there's interest, and perhaps the sheriff can chime in as far as if we did, relatively modest hiring bonuses essentially, if that's needed to get across the finish line where we're trying to get, or if we can look at that later during the negotiation union process.
Okay, let's hear from the sheriff.
Yes, please.
Yep.
This came up so quickly, and it's actually a great thing that we're having this conversation today, but it came up pretty quick. I haven't really had a chance to go around to my partners and find out how successful they are with their bonuses. And I think there's a lot of nuances that we need to figure out as a county if we are going to offer a hiring incentive about, the logistics of how that's going to be. Is it going to be up front? Is it going to be over time? We talked about doing it as a housing assistance. So I think I personally would be more comfortable having more information on that before we dedicate resources to it, just because I want to know if people are finding success with that, because it seems like everybody's offering those right now. But I'm also very open to the idea. If it is working, then I think that we should look at it, and I just appreciate that it's even on the table. So I don't know if that gave you an answer or not, but I'm kind of middle ground on it right now.
Madam Chair?
Hold on, let's make sure that, are you complete?
I am. I was just going to say, I think it's something, there seems to be broad support on the board for whatever we need to do to revisit that later, and perhaps include it as part of the bargaining discussion that we're going to be entering in the coming months with all the unions as well.
Okay, and Supervisor Gonzalez?
Eric, I was wondering if you could just remind me, I know that you've been very diligent in the past about seeking funding from outside of the San Diego County General Fund in terms of possibly, to augment and assist with what we're trying to do today with your funding. Can you kind of share with us what you've done in the past in terms of supplementing your budget?
Yeah, so we did write the Prop 64 grant, which gave us 4 positions, 3 deputy sheriffs and an analyst position that we're trying to hire right now. We have also, with the help of the probation chief and her staff, written a grant for CalAIM, which is hopefully going to really help reduce our cost with our medical coverage, and potentially help with some staffing, at least short term for the jail on the medical side. We bring in what's called SCAP funding each year, which helps out with the jail. I think we brought about $160,000 this year. So we're always looking for opportunities. Opportunities in the corrections world for grants is a lot more difficult. But I did go to the Community Corrections Partnership when I took over as sheriff and got 4 correctional officer positions funded by the Community Corrections Partnership. In addition to, I think we have 2 others through AB 109. So I believe, and Kelly Kennedy's there, I may be wrong, but I know we have at least 5, but I think potentially 6 correctional officer positions are funded by the Community Corrections Partnership. So we are always looking outside of the general fund to try to bring revenue into the county to add these positions. And then outside of that, we're ongoing communication with San Juan Bautista to bring in revenue to add a second deputy sheriff. And then we, when we have our school resource officer, the school actually funds unprecedented. They fund 85% of that position. So we're trying.
Okay, thank you. And then the other part of my question from previously was, from which budget or departments will we be taken away from in order to make this happen at the sheriff's office? Ramon?
To address the funding issue, administration had a conversation yesterday about utilizing the matching funds. So currently we have $400,000 available in grant matches, and if we were to use 200,000 from there, meaning if I'm allowed to have the flexibility to reduce the grant match fund, instead of having 400,000, we can have 200,000, and then if the number is 412 as an estimate, then we would only need we wouldn't need anything else, because right now the general fund overview, if you remember the summary at the bottom of it, there's about $250,000 there that we can potentially use for funding what is being proposed. And so we'd have that 256. If I reduce, again, the grant match, it's the simplest way for me to make an adjustment. Then we would be able to address this $412,000, potentially additional costs, and knowing full well that HR would have to vet the numbers and confirm that the estimates are accurate. And so we could move forward with that.
And if we did move forward with this, we would still have a balanced budget.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Supervisor Sotelo?
Ramon, what about the adjustment in the capital expenditures? Because there was some money left over. I mean, is there a possibility? I don't want to restrict ourselves from minimizing our matching grant funds, like, cutting potential opportunities in the future. And so, what about the adjustment from the capital? Or you're saying there would still be the adjustment from the capital, and we need to do both?
That is the adjustment, right?
So, great question. And the adjustment related to the capital improvement program that was discussed last week by Steve Loop. So he went through the capital list for general funds, and I believe last week his recommendation, RMA's recommendation for capital projects, was instead of using $1 million from general fund contribution, he said the general fund can reduce that $1 million contribution by 200,000. And I did go ahead and implement that reduction as part of the general fund overview. So that $250,000 that's available is in large part due to not only Steve's recommendation to reduce the general fund contribution for capital projects. We also had the recorder, Francisco Diaz. He approached me, and he noticed that the recorder, or maybe it was a board member that noticed that the recorder budget was showing a net cost to the general fund of approximately $200,000. And so we addressed that issue. The recommended budget actually had that $200 shortfall in the system. However, for presentation purposes, for some reason, because we created a new department with new divisions, it did not display that $200,000 amount as going into the general fund. And I've since fixed that issue. If folks look at the recorder's budget unit, and if you hit refresh on your web browser, you should see it's actually showing a surplus. But we know, that the recorder's budget is actually a net zero cost to the general fund, because the recorder has a trust fund that they use based on actual transactions that happen in any given fiscal year. If there's need to offset costs, it comes in. Long story short, we had 200,000 from capital improvements being reduced, and we had 200,000 in revenues being increased. And we also had a couple of other items that help get the general fund to show that $250,000 as available.
I'm just trying, like right now, I'm just trying to understand where we're getting this 412,000. So I know originally it was said, okay, adjust from the capital expenditures, and then we would capture the other shortfall from the vacancies of the ag biologist, and I think it was grounds and maintenance. So, but now what I'm hearing is what you're recommending is, it sounds like, and that's why I'm asking for kind of clarification, keep the ag biologist, keep your grounds and maintenance, but use the grant matching funds to fulfill that shortfall instead of these positions. Am I understanding that correctly?
You do have the two options.
Okay.
We can unfund the two vacant positions that were shared by Supervisor Kosmicki, or we can reduce the grant match by 200,000, and we would address the $412,000 shortfall.
So what is the potential of us possibly losing funding or opportunities if we reduce the grant?
The reason I'm comfortable with reducing the grant match by $200,000 is because I know the general fund already, I don't have the full figure, but the fixed asset schedule shows that $400,000 item. And if you look at the general fund column, the total there is probably $800,000. And so that shows that departments are planning for fixed asset purchases. And so we do have the potential of using the existing budget for fixed asset costs as a match, because some general fund departments, they already know, they anticipate the need for certain purchases. I'm not saying we're going to be able to use 100% of that, $400,000 figure, aside from what we're talking about as a grant match. So administration decided to put $400,000 there, potentially to go after grants and provide for that grant match. I'm letting you know that we are, in addition to the 400,000, we have another 400,000 that departments are already budgeting.
Okay.
And so that budget can potentially be used as the grant match.
Is this 400,000 from this matching grant, is this a new thing that we're doing, or have we traditionally always done this? And then if we've traditionally always done it, what was the amount that we ended up spending on it? How much of it did we end up using?
This is a new item.
Okay.
This $400,000 figure is a new item for fiscal year 24-25.
Is there anything like in the works that the reason why it's 400, or is 400 just kind of an idea that it's just a number thrown out there, or is there anything that, I just don't want to make the mistake of cutting this if there's something in the works that people are like, no, we're working on, whatever it is. And then I also would love to hear at some point, I'll stop in just 1 second, Jose, but from, I don't know, is grounds and maintenance, is that going to be from Steve, an ag biologist from Ken, how you feel about giving up those positions? I think very gracious of you to offer it, but how does this kind of impact your position? Because I think that will help us make the decision if we should be looking at the matching grant funds, cutting that a bit, or if we should be looking at kind of cutting those positions. So thank you.
And Madam Chair, if I just briefly may.
Let's let the
Those positions are on another, that's fine.
yeah, let's let the clarification happen, and then we'll come back.
So to add clarification on the grant funding, this is our first year allocating for it. And the reason we requested it to be in this budget is admin goes after countywide grants that across the board support the entire county. 2 years ago, we applied for the CAR grant through Monterey Bay Resource
District. Monterey Air Resources District.
District, thank you. I couldn't. And they only provided 10,000 towards a capital asset, which was a vehicle, and then we had to fund the rest of the vehicle. And that was the same case for RMA, and we had to scrounge the budget and pull together to make those purchases happen. In addition, there are other grants available to us for electric stations and other things that do also require a match. So that is why we requested to have a little cushion and have that available to us so we can go after grants we need that would support the entire county.
So did you enough? Did you kind of overestimate? Would you feel comfortable if we went to 200 that it would be sufficient for what you guys are kind of thinking and have in mind and that you've reviewed as grant opportunities?
I believe we would. And our initial plan was to go after a plan on how we would implement charging stations. And then the second thing is working with Selena's office to do charging stations.
Okay, so you feel 200 would be sufficient for you? Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions.
You also asked about RMA and.
Eventually, I just thought Supervisor Kosmicki was going to.
Sorry, and I'm not trying to, it was
Okay,
related.
so let's go to Supervisor Kosmicki.
I was just simply going to point out that those two departments, I was planning to pull those from consent just so the board can make a clear decision on whether to pull from the positions or to use the grant match fund. And the only clarification I had was, I see the fixed asset schedule at the top, Ramon, but where would I pull? Is it in the consent and I apologize because I didn't get a chance to look at that, or would that be on regular so that we can have clarity on that when we get to that?
The fixed asset schedule is an attachment, and I believe it's part of final deliberations.
So would it be
That's at the
okay?
very end.
So would it be okay to bring up Ken and
Yeah, because
Steve
this
at this
decision
time?
needs to be made before we can move on for others. I say right now, we need to have them weigh in because it's impacting other departments. So if Ken and Steve would like to come up and make comments. And thank you for being here. Ken, go ahead, you go first.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Ramon and Steve. And I also appreciate I was reached out on behalf of administration and your board as well to consider this option. So also appreciate you calling it, Supervisor Sotelo. We're really ready to handle it. We're team players in ag, and at this point in the juncture, for us to hold things tight and handle it with the staffing we have for the year and regroup and look again next year, we're on board. So, thank you.
Thank you. Come on up, Steve.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Board. Yes, regarding the position, spoke with supervisors and our building maintenance supervisor. Ironically, he's a current employee. We spoke a few weeks back, and this third position for building maintenance worker was going to be utilized to actually help maintain the jail to some degree, and then also buildings and grounds in general. But his comment was at the time that he feels that to have an efficient workforce, we need 2 building and ground maintenance workers. This third position is a good idea, but it's not essential, I'll say. And so even before the discussion that occurred with, eliminating this third position, his opinion was we need 2 for sure, but the third was, it was a very good idea, but it wasn't essential. So that was his opinion. So thank you.
Any further questions, Supervisor Sotelo?
No, I don't have any other questions. I mean, I will tell you, I think at this point, after hearing from Dulce and Ramon and both Steve and Ken, I think I would be more comfortable eliminating from the matching funds or reducing that amount this year than taking positions, especially out of our ag department. I think those are critical, and we want to do everything we can to support that industry. And so it sounds like it would be fine to reduce it from the matching grant fund. So that's where kind of I'm standing on the position. So thank you.
Coming back to Supervisor Kosmicki, did you want to add?
It sounds like there's support for the addition of, I think we can address those items when we get to them later. I'm personally fine going either way. I want to get this done. I would prefer to unfund the positions, frankly, because we got to take advantage of every grant opportunity we can get. But that said, I'm okay if that's what it takes to get it done, wherever the consensus of the board is at. But I know that those are later on. My main thing is just to make sure that we have support for the $412,000 addition to the budget.
Supervisor Zenger?
Yeah, is there any openness to taking maybe like 12% of which would be 100K of the travel and then some of the grant, so we still have more of the grant matching if need be? Because I mean, if we take 100K from the travel and training budget, that's still, and we're only using 60%, so it's only like using 72%, so we still have like a 30% wiggle room to expand on that. So that way we keep a little more of the grant funds, and then that gets, just to balance it out a little bit. Is there any board members open to that? Or we just want to take all grant matching funds?
Yeah.
Any comments? Because I have comment. Okay, I'm not supportive of that at this time. I am supportive of doing an analysis of travel and where Supervisor Kosmicki said dive into what is needed. The reason I'm not is because in this decision that we're making, we're starting to have a movement of how we look at positions and departments differently. And one of the things we have to keep in mind is there have been past requests for certifications of employees and to give like a bump up or a bonus or a some sort of increase in pay to be able to have those certifications. And we are constantly hearing in order to keep people, we need to keep giving them incentives. So I think we're going to have other costs in other locations. So I'm not supportive right now until we have more definitive information. It is nice to know, and I thank the auditor for showing that it is somewhere between 60 and 80%. Where that 20% is not being spent, I'd like to know where that is before we just do a blanket, cutting or reducing of the budget. On my other topic is on dealing with restricted funds and AB 109 usage for the county, and understanding and have the board understand more. There's the huge committee that oversees AB 109 and that funding. I really feel that we need to have more of an understanding of what can that be used for, and what asks can the board bring to that committee that could help relieve general fund burdens. But at the same time, a conversation that was brought up was about the communications being an option of coming out of a restricted fund. So making sure that we really understand what we can use restricted funds on and not have it be, well, we've never done that before. It's not the way it's been done. But is it possible? So if we could just keep that in mind for future budgeting. Where I'm going right now is I also am leaning more towards the grant match. I believe because there's the $400,000 that departments have budgeted in grant match, plus the $400,000 that administration is budgeting, which is really $800,000. And that's a bit aggressive compared to where we've been since we've never done this before in budgeting. And please, Ramon, step up and tell me if I'm relaying. Okay, so taking the $200,000 from there, I support that, and then really looking at what is the need of the grant matching, and how do we start having departments look at the forward thinking of grants and budgeting for those matches so that we are getting more of a precise number and not kind of just throwing darts at that. So, and understanding, just my final comment is that anything that we're doing, these are salaried employees, and it is a dominoes long-term effect. And it's not just this budget cycle that we're having to balance this. We have to balance this for the years of the future of these departments. And we really need to start talking about revenue generation and where that's going to be. So with that said, I'm going to kick it right back to Supervisor Kosmicki because he started the motion, and I'm going to let him finish it.
All right. Considering everything we've heard, so we don't have to do different votes and everything, I'm going to propose that we approve the sheriff's budget with the addition of $456,000, which would include the $256,000 in reserve available, along with $200,000 from the grant matching fund.
Madam Chair.
Can I get
in order to fund the reclassification of corrections employees?
Okay, hold on.
Sheriff Taylor.
Do I need to get a second, County Council? I need a second before we can start talking.
I'll second that then.
Okay, I got a second from Supervisor Gonzalez to Supervisor Kosmicki. Go ahead, Gracie. What do we have?
Sheriff Taylor has his hand raised. I'm not
Okay, so now Sheriff Taylor can talk because we have a first and a second.
I'm sorry, it was raised for a little bit. I just
Sorry
wanted to
about that.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to publicly thank Ken and Steve. Coming off a couple weeks where I was feeling a little bit down about things, this last few days have been incredible to see how people can come together and help each other out. So the fact that, I think it's a win-win, the fact that Ken and Steve both offered to give up a position to help our office. It's a strange place to be in, to be asking someone to sacrifice for our benefit. But the fact that they did that, I think, is incredible. And it sounds like the motion's already out there, but I was just going to try to push you towards staffing their positions that they need instead of having charging stations. So it looks like that's the way we're going, and I appreciate it.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, I got a first and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so that's 5-0 on the sheriff's it's a amended temporary due pass. Making sure I have got that right. Okay, I'd like to take a 5-minute break right now before we get into the other items, because I think it's going to go pretty quickly. A 5-minute break, so we'll come back at 10:35, according to the clock that's not telling time accurately. I think we're going to need lunch because I think the rest is going to happen pretty fast. So I don't think we're going to need lunch because I think the latest will probably be is 1 o'clock. Yeah. What is it? Oh. Okay. So, yeah, so let's go talk. Yep.
Okay.
We actually were thinking about the special trip to January before coming back, but then I can ask just for that, but yeah. I'm not sure. Yes, it's neat. Son, daughter, folks still. It's like big blessing. A lot of families yeah. We like to the day before daughter.
David says. David says. Okay, we're coming back from our little break. Okay, now we're still on regular agenda. We're going to move back.
Motion for temporary due pass.
Second.
I'll second it.
Okay, I have a first from Supervisor Sotelo, second from Kosmicki. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that's a 5-0. Okay, moving on to County Office of Administration Office, which is item number 2, budget unit number 15. Any comments or concerns? I think the main thing, Ramon, is just acknowledging that there's no change.
That is correct. There are no changes to item number 2.
Okay.
I'll just, Madam Chair.
Yeah, go right ahead,
Just
Supervisor
reiterate my
Kosmicki.
concern that we have a tight budget, and in principle, I've always been against the nonprofit donations, so I'll be voting against this.
Okay, any other comments?
No changes to the library's budget.
Okay. Can I get a motion?
Move to approve as recommended.
Second.
Okay, so Kosmicki is the first, second is Sotelo. All in favor?
Aye.
That's a 5-0. Okay, moving on to the sheriff, which we already did with amendments. And then we're moving on to item number 13, RMA planning, budget unit number 650. Seeing no comments
I'll just
from,
reiterate again, concerns I had last time. I don't need to repeat them. That's all.
okay. Can I get a motion?
Move to approve as recommended.
Second.